Hello everyone. This is a short video about online learner profiling. Depending on your progress in this course, you may or may not have read about the idea that there are different types of learners. If you have read the research article by Shram and Hong, you will as of now know that there are likely several significant traits or characteristics that make learners successful in online learning. In fact, there have been several studies in the last decade or so that have tried to profile online learners, with the main objective being that educators and policymakers to a certain extent have a measure or a more nuanced understanding of what contributes to a learner's success in online learning. These studies include the use of established learning theories and psychometric tests, such as learning styles, which itself is a theory with many variants, like the VAK model, the VARK model, and Kolb's learning inventory. Then there are psychometric instruments, such as multiple intelligences, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the Big Five personality tests. And then further, there are more technology-focused models, such as Venkatesh's unified theory of acceptance and use of technology, and Teta and Collins' lazy user model, which is based on using whichever technology is easiest and most convenient. So there are also models based on digital literacies and models specifically made for learning with technology, such as Theo's Digital Native Assessment Scale. Still, there are other age-old theories that have been referred to, such as study habits, personality measures, motivation, and so on. In fact, Shram and Hong drew one of their measure dimensions from study habits, which is a model that dates back to the early 1900s. It is evident that we can adapt these established theories to current contexts, yes. But we also need to acknowledge that teaching has changed. And technology, how technology has changed. The internet has been what people call nowadays as an absolute game changer that requires us to learn new knowledge and skills, and what they call as 21st century skills. With 21st century skills, we have 21st century education, or 21st century learning. And with 21st century learning, we have 21st century learners. These 21st century learners, online learners being what I would call a subtype, are likely to have different preferences and dispositions towards learning with technology. You might be aware that some research coined these learners as digital natives, Generation Z, or the Net generation, because of how they supposedly are able to and are more predisposed towards using online technology. Personally, for me, this is a sweeping generalization that learners are more or less the same, that learners are homogeneous. I personally believe that learners are very much different. Learners are heterogeneous. But at the same time, they may exhibit similar dispositions towards learning or learning online. Now, I am currently doing a research on profiling these 21st century online learners. I am aware that there has been a lot of research done previously using models such as learning styles and personality psychometrics. But I believe that learners cannot be typified based on their personality alone or their preferred sensory stimulation alone, like hearing, sense of sight, sense of hearing, sense of touch. And then there is also a risk of self-fulfilling prophecy, that when you predetermine how you want to group your learners beforehand, your findings will exclusively revolve around that explanation alone. For example, if you, as a teacher, start with, right, I will group my learners based on visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. You will likely end up, at the end of the day, having groups of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. Yes, no doubt. But will this not create the illusion, the false perception that one, the learning model of your choice is the highest authority in ensuring how students learn best. That is the best explanation, that you believe that it is true. And that two, that learners forever have only one preferred way of learning. Is that really true? Cannot they move from one type to another? Cannot they learn and relearn their preferences? So, the learners is made up of many things. Their upbringing and social support, their study habits, the technology that they own, what they use these technologies for, their motivation in using these technologies. There is seemingly an endless number of dimensions that account for learners' success in online learning. Learners are simply multidimensional. Schramm and Hong acknowledged this theory. Schramm and Hong said, and this is a paraphrase from my part, we need to look at the characteristics of these learners and see how these characteristics influence the learning preferences or the learning experience. My research is similar but goes beyond this approach, in that in my research, I do not start with predetermined dimensions, but rather a collection of statements on learning and technology dispositions, not attached to any learning model. For the purpose of structure, I employed a very liberal theoretical framework, so that at the end of the research, I could organize them into distinguishable dimensions. So while Schramm and Hong identified dimensions before their research, I identified my dimensions, after my research, based on the data that I collect using a questionnaire that I made called the OLP. Now, either approach is fine because it depends on what you're looking for. Now, for my research, because I did not base mine on any predetermined models, I had to create my own instrument. I designed a questionnaire which I call the Online Learner Profiling Questionnaire, or the OLP for short. It is an instrument with 28 items drawn from as many learning models. Initially, when it's drawn from as many learning models, I adapted and draw upon the items that were used in learning models beforehand, like learning styles, study habits. However, initially I started with more than 150 items. More than 150 items, because there were so many learning models that were being used to profile learners. But through repeated pilot studies, I managed to narrow the number down to 28 significant items. These items are loosely organized according to Pierre Bourdieu's theory. Now, let me give a brief introduction of Pierre Bourdieu. Pierre Bourdieu is a French sociologist whose life pursuit revolves around identifying and profiling individuals based on social class, social power. Bourdieu believes that what we own, what we possess, defines our dispositions to act or behave in certain ways. Now, this possession that we have is not merely physical possessions such as money or technology, devices that we own. No, but it also includes our education, our skills and intelligences, our experiences, intelligences, more than one type of intelligence, our cultural upbringing, everything that has shaped us as who we are. In turn, who we have become predisposes us to have preferences on what to do and how to behave. This can be applied to profiling learners, online learners, in fact. The intelligence, the experience, possession of certain technology devices, money to buy this technology, habits inculcated throughout school, how much one spends online, how far one prefers books over a website. All these can be markers to measure learners' preferences on how to learn online. Now, some markers are more significant than others. Well, some markers do not make any difference whatsoever, no matter how diverse the differences are. This was why I started with a lot of questions in my instruments, only to find that most of them were not significant indicators or contributors to influence learners' dispositions towards online learning. I found that having different types of learning disciplines was not that significant. I found that having different types of general interests was not that significant. On the other hand, I found that how calm or easily stressed a student is can be significant. I found how interesting or boring the online information is can be significant. Now, these significant items were the ones kept as the 28 items in the questionnaire. The questionnaire is available on Canvas for everyone to complete. Now, on viewing this video, you may or may not have completed the OLP questionnaire. That is fine. But I would like you all to complete the questionnaire as soon as possible so that we can discuss the findings in the near future. What the questionnaire does is that it will take your response according to these 28 items, your level of agreement according to these 28 items. These 28 items, in fact, represent 6 significant dimensions or factors that were not predetermined but came out from the data itself. The idea is that every single person exhibits these 6 factors. Currently, tentatively, I call these factors from 1 to 6 as perceptive use of the internet, control of one's learning processes, dependence on negotiating understanding, learners' dependence on external assistance to gain understanding, internet dependence, and indulgences. So those are the 6 factors. Now, each factor is a spectrum. It's a linear spectrum that has no negative ends. No matter where someone is located on this spectrum, it doesn't signify weakness, but rather it informs us of that person's current disposition to what they believe is the most preferred and most effective way of them to learn. Now, so the only thing that differentiates us with another person is the level of agreement to these 6 factors. So different people will have different combinations of these 6 factors. Different people will have different combinations of these 6 factors. I will spare the technicalities of how these combinations have been concluded through factor analysis that I've done in my research. But based on my progress in this research, I have identified 7 different main types of learners. And from these 7 big types, there are a few smaller subtypes. These subtypes link the main types together, like bridges. At this point, I would like to use an analogy. Imagine that we have 7 main bus stations. These bus stations represent our main types. In between these 7 main bus stations, moving from one station to another, we have bus stops in between. These bus stops represent our subtypes. The idea is that commuters or students, in this case, can change from one station to another because over time dispositions change. But we cannot jump simply directly from one main bus station to another main bus station. In order for us to change location, we move from bus stop to bus stop. These bus stops are our subtypes. Subtypes to me are more likely indicators that someone is moving from one main bus station to another bus station. Now, how did I end up with this theory, you ask? When I conduct this questionnaire on a group of 407 students, I found 7 big clusters or big types, which I call A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Each cluster is made up of students sharing very similar dispositions. So a big cluster is made up of many students sharing similar dispositions. Not the same, but similar. In addition to these, I found smaller clusters that do not conform to these big clusters. Now, because there is a limited number of combinations that you can generate from 6 factors alone, the further a mini cluster is from cluster A, so the further a bus stop is from a main station, the closer will it be to another cluster, cluster B, for example. So the closer would the bus stop be to another main station. 7 big clusters, 7 bus stations, several small type subtype clusters. These are all bus stops. And then we also have a few outliers that do not conform to any of these bus stops or bus stations, which are unique to themselves. Now, so once we have everyone fill in the questionnaire, we can find out how many of you fall into these main clusters, how many are currently waiting in bus stops, and if anyone doesn't conform to any of these groupings, how many of you are outliers? You go against the grain and be an outlier. No problem with that. One thing for certain, no matter your disposition, this theoretical framework accounts for all types, from the most common to the most rare. Because an outlier is still a student, and teachers and policymakers must acknowledge that whatever their online learning system is, it will cater from the common types to the outliers. It has to. Who knows, maybe over time the outliers numbers grow, and they themselves eventually become a mini cluster in their own right. So, once again, fill in the questionnaire and we can find out. This questionnaire does not identify any weaknesses, but the modus operandi, the mode of its method, is that the findings will be presented as anonymous cases, because its purpose is, in fact, to inform the teacher or the policymaker. It is not a personal psychometric test for learners to act on. It is a calculative and statistically pragmatic approach to profile the learners based on the interplay of their many characteristics. What do you think? Would you be interested in finding out your own results? Now, I hope this approach inspires you to read further on how learners are profiled and the purpose behind profiling them. We can always continue our discussion in Canvas and reflect on how you perceive yourself as a learner, and in turn, how this influences your preferences towards learning online.